Okay, I'm going to get started by welcoming everyone. Welcome to Wat Tung Yu. Nice to see everyone here. Good morning. Welcome to everyone who's joining online as well. Today is our group learning program where I'll be sharing with you guys teachings of the Buddha to be able to help you understand the path that he taught. He taught a path of how to train your mind to get to enlightenment, where the mind's completely peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. This is where you've been able to train the mind to get to the point where there's no longer any anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy. You can get to the point where your mind no longer experiences this. Oftentimes people think that these feelings are produced by something external. You might think it's your mom and dad that are frustrating you, or your brothers and sisters are annoying you, or your boss is irritating you, or something of this nature. But it's actually not true. It's your own mind that's causing these feelings, and this is why you can eliminate them. The Buddha figured out how to do this for himself, and then he shared those teachings for the rest of his life to help people to understand what it takes to be able to train your mind to get to this enlightened mental state. So what I'm going to be doing today is helping you with meditation by guiding you in a meditation session, and then afterwards I'm going to share a talk on the life story of the Buddha. It's chapter 19 of this book, where each Sunday I go chapter by chapter in this book. And in chapter 19, it's titled The Difficult Human Existence, Sickness, Aging, and Death. These are three of the four motivators that motivated Siddhartha Gotama to make this journey towards enlightenment. So you're going to learn about his life story and these challenging times for a human being where you're experiencing sickness, aging, and death. This can oftentimes be very challenging for your mind. And then also when other people are experiencing this, people that are close to you, you might have real challenges when they're experiencing sickness, aging, and death. So we're going to talk about that, and I'll help you to be able to understand the life story of the Buddha and how he understood and discovered why it is that you experience so many struggles during those periods of time of sickness, aging, and death. So if you'd like to join for meditation, which is part of the training that the Buddha shared, but there's other things that you need too besides meditation. The way that I start our meditation is with some chanting to ease our mind into the meditation. And I see some of you guys have these chanting sheets. If you'd like one, it looks like someone has placed some here in the middle of the floor. They're also over there on the cabinet as well. You can chant along if you like, because it'll actually help you to get more benefit out of the meditation, where it'll ease your mind into the meditation and help you to get more benefit out of the meditation itself. It's important to understand that during the lifetime of the Buddha, he used chanting as a way to help his students remember the teachings. Every 2 weeks, the students would come together and they would recite his teachings orally. It was a learning tool or a learning device to be able to commit the teachings to memory. So you can see from the origins of chanting that this isn't a rite, a ritual, or ceremony, worship, or prayer, or anything like that. The Buddha actually never taught any of those kinds of things. If you see rites, rituals, ceremonies, worship, or prayer associated with his teachings, you can understand that that's not actually part of his teachings. Those are things that people have misunderstood and maybe tried to add into his teachings. So the Buddha didn't teach those things because it doesn't lead to the cultivation of the mind and the training of the mind. So these chants, the way that I use them is to help students to be able to ease their mind into meditation and actually get more benefit out of the meditation itself. If you read the English translations of these chants, you're going to see a lot of appreciation, gratitude, and respect for the Buddha. And because of that, I don't even think that the Buddha actually created these chants, because the Buddha wouldn't walk around and say, here, chant these chants to me out of respect for me, right? This would be ego and arrogance. This would be like putting yourself above people and looking down on someone. And by the time you get to enlightenment, you don't think that way. You don't judge people as being above you or below you. You just think of everybody as being equal. So the Buddha wouldn't have told his students or taught his students to chant these to him out of respect for him, but his students would have had an enormous amount of respect for him, because if you learn from a teacher how to move from anger, sadness, frustration, and all these other discontent feelings to the peaceful, joyful mental state that is enlightenment, and this teacher didn't want anything from you or expect anything from you, they were just helping you out of the kindness of their heart, you'd probably have a lot of appreciation, gratitude, or respect for that person too. So that's where I think these chants came from, as students, either during his life or after his death. So if you'd like to chant them, you're more than welcome welcome to, and you'll surely see more benefit in your meditation because of it. But whether you choose to do that or not, it's a choice for you to make. Once we're in the meditation, you're going to hear me providing you some guidance in terms of kind of like teaching you or instructing you how to meditate while we're actually meditating together. Then there's going to be a period of time where it's just quiet and we're all meditating. Those of us here at the temple and anyone who's joining online, we'll just all be meditating together. During that period of time of quietness, I'm sure you're going to hear occasional sounds. You might hear a car going by, a dog barking, a bird chirping, someone here might sneeze or cough. This is all normal because you live in an impermanent world. You're not going to experience something like permanent silence. It's just not possible. If you're in meditation with a craving, with a desire, with a want or expectation of permanent silence, when you hear a sound, you will cause your mind to be frustrated or annoyed. But you can overcome that by understanding that the world is impermanent, things are constantly changing, and that you're not going to be in an environment where it's permanently quiet. So you're going to hear sounds, and these sounds are going to arise, they're going to change, and they're going to fade away. And this is the world working exactly the way it's designed to work, which is everything's constantly changing around you. You won't find anything around you that is permanent. So during that period of time of quietness, you can be at ease and peaceful and joyful, even if you hear a certain sound from time to time. Then we're going to come out of the meditation with some more chanting, and that's where I'll start today's class, helping you guys to understand the life story of the Buddha in these challenging times of sickness, aging, and death. In terms of your body position for meditation, there's 4 positions that the Buddha taught: seated, lying, standing, and walking. And you would learn these different positions at different times as part of your journey to enlightenment. It's kind of like assembling a tool belt, because you would need these different positions at different times in terms of your journey to enlightenment, because your body's not going to be able to be in the seated position permanently. It's just not possible because this body is impermanent. So oftentimes people are learning on the floor, sitting on the floor, or sitting in a chair or a bench or a sofa in a wheelchair. You can really sit however you like. So I'm going to give you some guidance on the seated position, but just understand you can learn these other positions at other times because you're going to need them as part of your journey. And also understand that what I share with you on the seated position, this is up to you whether or not you consider these or not. What's important is that you find something that's comfortable for you, whether it's something that I'm teaching you or not, because if your body's painful, you're not going to be able to train the mind very easily that way. But also if the mind is and the body is too luxurious, you're not going to be able to train there either. So you'd like the body to be comfortable, and you can find whatever's comfortable for you. The things that I'm going to share with you are just suggestions or recommendations for you to consider, but it's up to you to find something that's comfortable because everybody's body is a bit different. But some things you might consider is that if you're on the floor, you might have some cushions under your rear. This is going to help soften your seat a bit. And if you bring your legs together in the cross-leg position, you might just choose to do this lightly. Whereas if they're real tight, it can impede the circulation in the lower body. Some people like to put their legs off the mat. This gets your hips up in the air, and it lessens the angle at the hips, the knees, and the ankles, allowing the circulation to flow. The Buddha put his right hand over his left with his thumbs together, and he put this into his lap. If this is comfortable for you, you could use it. But again, it's not about everyone doing it the same way because that's not possible. That would be permanence. All of our bodies are different, and we're going to find different things to be comfortable. So some people like to put their palms on their thighs or on their knees. Some people put their palms up. Some people rest their hands comfortably in their lap. So keep in mind, you're training the mind. You're not training the body here. So find whatever is comfortable for you. And that's true for anybody who's in a chair or on a bench or a sofa, wheelchair, any of these kinds of things. You can also sit however you're comfortable. Some people put their feet flat on the floor or lightly cross at the ankles, but you can see me sitting in a chair here with my legs crossed. So that's an option for you as well. In terms of your hands and arms, you can put those wherever you like as well. And then with your upper body, it's helpful if this is erect. With the sternum up and the shoulders back, it's going to help keep your mind attentive and alert during the meditation, because this is a dedicated, active, purposeful training session where you're eliminating certain unwholesome qualities from the mind and you're cultivating certain wholesome qualities in the mind. So you'd like the mind to be attentive and alert during the meditation. Whereas if you were slouched, the mind would have a tendency to be dull or lethargic. But if you were real rigid with the upper upper body. Your mind could be overactive or uptight. So you'd like the upper body to be erect with the sternum up and shoulders back, because not only will it keep the mind attentive and alert, but it also make it easy for you to breathe in through the nose and out through the nose. So again, I'm going to ease into meditation with some chanting, which you guys are welcome to join in on, and then I'll come back in with the guidance afterwards. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Mahakawa Bhutang Mahakavanang Apivateyami Savakato Mahakavata Tammo Dhammang namasami Supatipano mahakavato Savaka Sangho Sanghang namami Namo rasa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa Namo rasa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa Namo rasa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa Iti piso mahakava arahang samma sambuddho Vicacaranang sammuno Sakato rokavitu Anuttero purisa Dhamma sati satatawa manusarang Bhutto Bhagavati. Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, and the upper body erect, just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath. A nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled. Just a gradual inhale through the nose, experiencing the full breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathing gradually through the nose, developing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose, experiencing the full breath. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the breath well established, start focusing the mind on the breath. Either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมหาเขวาพุทธังมหาเขวันังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมหาเขวัตตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนมหาเขวัตโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมหาเขวาอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารณังสัมมุโนสกาโตโรกาวิตุอนุเตโรปุริสาดามาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังพุทโธภควาติ Okay, if you guys would like to slowly make your way out of meditation. Once again, welcome to all of you guys. Nice to see everyone here this morning. Welcome to everyone joining online as well. What I'm going to be sharing with you guys is this topic of a difficult human existence, sickness, aging, and death. This is chapter 19 of our book. The human existence doesn't have to be difficult, but it tends to be because the mind is untrained in the unenlightened state. By the time you get to enlightenment, everything's completely at ease. So I titled this chapter, The Difficult Human Existence, because oftentimes people who are coming to the path to enlightenment, they're experiencing a certain amount of difficulties and struggles in their day-to-day life. But getting to enlightenment and training your mind, you'll actually overcome all of that. By the time you get to enlightenment, your mind's completely peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. You'll notice that you no longer experience any discontent feelings. You will have eliminated the causes and conditions that are producing things like anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy. All of that can be trained away where the mind no longer experiences those discontent feelings. You can opt out of experiencing things like anger and stress and anxiety for the rest of your life. You just need to be able to understand the wisdom of how to train your mind to accomplish that. The Buddha discovered these individual pollutions that are in the mind and how to uproot those pollutions out of the mind through training of the mind. And when you do, not only will you eliminate those discontent feelings, but you'll notice that the mind's focused, you'll have concentration, clarity, and deep memory because the mind's performing optimally at that point. You'll notice that your personal, professional relationships are really blossoming because you don't have bitterness and harshness and hostility in your mind anymore, so that's not coming out. Right now, you might be bitter and harsh and hostile in certain situations, feeling like you're justified in your anger, but when you come to understand through the teachings of the Buddha that your mind is causing these feelings itself, you can understand understand that it's very unwise to be bitter and harsh and hostile in your relationships, because as long as you're doing that, that's all just going to be coming back to you. The mind in the unenlightened state walks around with a belief that it's other people who's causing you to be angry and frustrated. But you can see through independently verifying the teachings of the Buddha that it's your own mind that's causing these feelings. The teachings of the Buddha aren't about a bunch of beliefs and then hoping something good happens when you die. It's about learning, growing, and developing in this life to be able to train your mind to get to this peaceful and joyful mental state, where ultimately by the time you get to enlightenment, you're not even experiencing a bad mood any longer. So what I do in this particular chapter of chapter 19 is I help you to understand a bit of the life story of the Buddha. And sometimes people are surprised that it's chapter 19, and why isn't it chapter 1? Well, when the Buddha was asked during his lifetime, he was getting ready to die. He was about 3 months away from death, and he knew that he was going to be dying in 3 months. That's how enlightened he was, that he knew exactly when he was going to die, and he informed people that he was going to be dying in 3 months. People asked him, well, what do we do? How do we respect you when you die? And he said, well, if you'd like to respect me, just learn and practice my teachings. That's the way to respect me. So what I've done in this programs that I share, in this book that I wrote and all the others, is I really make sure that you understand the teachings of the Buddha, because that's what's going to lead to your improvement in your day-to-day life. Understanding the life story of the Buddha is surely helpful, because you can understand his journey of what it took for him to be able to get to enlightenment, and you can learn certain lessons from that, and you can understand this individual's life. And there's a lot of misunderstandings about his life in the world. So what I'm going to share with you is what's actually documented and what we know to actually be true. But just understand that the reason why this is chapter 19 is because the Buddha guided his students to be able to focus on his teachings. That's what a Buddha is interested in, is seeing people learn and grow and develop on the path to get to this enlightened mental state where you can experience the peace and joy. A Buddha has already done the hard work of being able to figure out how to get to enlightenment and be able to train their own mind. And then what they do is they dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their teachings so that other people can experience that benefit as well. Their sole purpose and goal for the rest of their life is to help as many people as possible get to that enlightened mental state. Because if you experience that peaceful and joyful mental state, understand that it's a permanent mental state, that you will no longer experience any of these discontent feelings or the difficulties and struggles in day-to-day life. So this chapter was titled The Difficult Human Existence because that is what one experiences in the unenlightened state, particularly around sickness, aging, and death, when you're experiencing these three particular aspects of your life. But you can get past all of that to the point where, just like the Buddha, your mind is completely peaceful and joyful. So I'm going to be sharing this talk with you to help you understand his teachings, and his life story. And then, of course, you're going to learn a little bit of his teachings along the way. But I'm going to actually stop for questions at one point, where after I share his life story, you guys can ask any and all questions that you like. Now, normally I stop at different times as I'm speaking. Maybe I teach for 15, 20, 30 minutes, open up for questions, teach another 15, 20, 30 minutes, open up for questions. But with this particular topic, it's actually better if I just explain the whole life story of the Buddha for you and then open up for questions at the end. If you would like to ask questions here at the temple, we have microphones in the white bowl here in the middle of the floor. If you would like to ask questions, just get a microphone. You press the gray button and you hold it up to your chin, and we'll be able to hear you at the temple, and they'll be able to hear you online as well. You can take these microphones back to your seat with you, because you might have more than one question, or someone around you might have a question. You can just share the microphone with them. If you speak here without a microphone, they won't be able to hear you online, so it's great if you speak with a microphone. And then if you're not using it, if you could turn it off, that way we won't get feedback through the speakers. That's really helpful. And then for anybody who's online, if you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, and you'd like to ask questions, you can put that in the comment section. I'll be able to see that. Or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and unmute your microphone and ask any and all questions that you like that way. So this talk about the life story of the Buddha, I've organized it in these sections, where we're going to talk about his birth, his early life, his journey to enlightenment, and then his teaching career. And ultimately, we're going to circle back and talk about sickness, aging, and death, because these tend to be very challenging times for you when you experience your own sickness, aging, and death, or the people around you that are close to you, when they're experiencing sickness, aging, and death. This can be a very big challenge for your mind. The Buddha figured out the solution here of why you're experiencing experiencing this challenge, and he figured out how to overcome it. So after I share with you his life story, I'm going to share with you some details about this to be able to help you overcome the challenges that you experienced during those time frames. Because this was part of the reasons why the Buddha actually decided to go on the journey to enlightenment. This was the motivating factors, that he saw people struggling with this sickness, aging, and death, and he decided he was interested in figuring out why this was occurring and what the solution was for it. So that's what is kind of embedded in his life story, is understanding the solution of how to fix this. So again, as we go, I'm going to share the teachings with you, and then at the end, I'll open up for questions. Anything you guys would like to ask, you're more than welcome to ask any and all questions. So this individual that we refer to as the Buddha, he was actually born and given the name Siddhartha Gotama. He was born in a region of the world that we refer to as Nepal. That's where he was born. But of course, that wasn't actually a country during that time frame. And he ends up teaching in what we refer to as Northeast India. But that line between Nepal and India didn't exist 2,500 years ago. He was born in 563 BC. And when he was born into a royal family. His mother was a queen. His dad was the king. And as part of the culture during this period of time, if you were a woman who was pregnant and close to delivery, they would actually take you back to your homeland where you grew up with your parents and your siblings and other family members in order for you to deliver the baby there. And then when you delivered the baby, you would have lots of people to be able to help you recover from that, because childbirth was very challenging. It's challenging today, and it was even more challenging 2,500 years ago. So when the Siddhartha Gautama's mother was close to delivery, they organized a caravan in order to take the queen back to her homeland in order to be able to deliver the baby. On her journey back to her homeland, she actually goes into labor. So they need to stop the caravan, and she gets out of the caravan and she goes over to this tree, and she's holding on to the branch of this tree trying to deliver the baby because it was having trouble coming out of the normal birthing canal, and it ends up breaking through the side of her stomach. And because of this, she ends up dying 7 days later. This was not uncommon 2,500 years ago for a woman to die during childbirth, and sometimes even children died during childbirth. Where today we would have just did a C-section and she would have been just fine, right? But 2,500 years ago, they didn't have that medical technology. So she actually died during or after the childbirth, about 7 days afterwards. And they also had protocols in place for this because it was not so uncommon for people to die during childbirth, that if as a female you died during childbirth and your children lived, then your siblings would adopt your children as their own. So his mother had an older sister who ends up adopting him as her own child. So essentially his aunt became his stepmother, and she raised him as her own child throughout his life. So as he was born, there's something that is written in the original teachings that occurred during his lifetime, but I don't actually think that this really truly occurred. I'll share it with you, but then you'll see as part of the story that I don't think this actually occurred. It's probably something that was added afterwards. So it's said in the original teachings and in the Pali Canon that at the time of Siddhartha Gautama's birth, that he walked 7 steps, lotus flowers blossomed under his feet, and he spoke and he said, "This will be my last birth." I don't think this is actually true, because if this was true, the next part of the story wouldn't be needed. Sometimes the way these things work is that when someone's done something as significant as the Buddha, sharing these teachings and helping countless people, as teachings are handed down from generation to generation, sometimes people embellish the stories in order to be able to make somebody look even better than they already were. We don't need to embellish the story of a Buddha. A Buddha has already done things that are very amazing for the world. So I wasn't there. I don't know that this is actually true, but I don't know that it's false either because I wasn't there. I just suspect that it's not true, because it's literally impossible to have a document from 2,500 years ago not change, or 2,000 years ago and it's written in stone and it's never going to change. Of course, these documents have changed, and that's why the Buddha teaches you not to believe any of his teachings, because then you're not just believing what you're seeing in the text, but you can learn and grow and develop and see the truth for yourself. So whether this miracle actually occurred or not, I don't know because I wasn't there, but I suspect it didn't occur, because this next part of the story wouldn't actually be needed if this was actually true. The next part of the story is that the king, being interested in knowing what his son was going to become, decided to summon fortune tellers or advisors to come and advise him of what his son was going to become. This was a common practice at the time. He summons 108 advisors to come and let him know what his son was going to become. Well, if your son is born and they're walking right away from birth and lotus flowers are blossoming under their feet and they're speaking, you wouldn't need other people to tell you what this person's going to become. You would pretty much know this being's pretty special, right? So I don't think that part of the story is true, but nonetheless, there's these advisors who come and advise his father of what his son is going to become. And 107 of these advisors share with his father that your son's going to be a great monarch. He's going to be a great ruler and leader, and he's going to rule over your kingdom and expand it far and wide. And of course, his father's like, that's my boy. Okay, yeah, that's what I want, right? But there was this one advisor who comes in at the end and he apologizes to the king. And he says, sir, I'm so sorry. I heard what those other advisors shared, and they are 100% truthful that your son is going to be a great leader, but not in the way that you think. He's not going to be a monarch. He's not going to be a ruler. He's actually going to be a spiritual leader. And his father didn't like this, and he decided that he was not going to allow his son to do that. He was interested in seeing his son do something else. Of course, be the ruler, be the monarch, and expand his kingdom. So he decides to sequester his son in the palace, never letting him go outside the palace, because his thought was that if he went outside into the kingdom and he got involved in worldly affairs, that he would be interested in being a spiritual leader. So instead, he keeps him in the palace for his entire life, helping to kind of woo him into the ways of being a monarch. He gives him amazing fabrics of clothing to wear. He gives him great entertainment, amazing food, beautiful women bathing him and taking care of him. Everything you can imagine that a rich father could give their son, this king gave to his son, trying to kind of get him hooked to this lifestyle of being a king, because he realized that he wouldn't be able to ever get this lifestyle any other way. And he thought that this would kind of secure him as being a monarch and being a ruler. So for 29 years, Siddhartha Gotama stays in the royal palace, growing up in this way, being lavished with all this lifestyle that his father was able to provide him. But at the age of 29, he realizes he's about to become the king, because during this time frame, you would become the king when you turned to the age 30, and your father would retire. And now your father, being alongside of you, would help you learn how to be a king. So at the age of 29, Siddhartha Gotama realized that he was going to become the king soon, and he had never even been outside the palace. And he thought, how can I rule over these people as the king if I've never even been in the kingdom to be able to see what their life is like? So he decides to go outside the palace without his father knowing, and against his father's wishes. He ends up going outside the palace, and he takes with him his royal attendant. This is like his main confidant, his chief of staff. And he goes outside the palace, and he has what's called the 4 observations. These are the things that motivated him to actually make his way to enlightenment. He sees a sickly person, an aging person, a dead corpse, and he sees a roaming ascetic, someone who's given up worldly life in order to seek a better understanding of life. And when he sees this sickly person, he sees this disgruntledness and this frustration around this person with the family members and so forth. And he needs to turn to his royal attendant and ask, like, what's going on over there? Why are those people so frustrated? And he's like, oh, that guy's sick, and he's not going to be able to help provide for basic resources that the family needs in order to sustain their life. And they're really struggling with being able to get the food and clothing and shelter and medical care that they need to sustain their life. And this was really impactful to Siddhartha Gotama, because he grew up in this life of luxury, right? That he had everything and anything you can imagine. And if you grew up that way for 29 years, you'd probably think everybody's experiencing that same thing, because that's what your life was like. So when he saw this individual that was really struggling in life, it really impacted his mind. And then he ends up seeing a aging person, kind of an older, decrepit person who was having difficulties walking and, struggling in life. And again, this person, there was a lot of difficulties and struggles around this individual. And he needs to turn to his royal attendant and is like, what's going on over there? What's that person doing? Why is there so much struggles? And he's like, oh, the same thing is like they can't work. They can't be able to provide for the things that they need in order to be able to get the basic necessities to sustain their life. And this also is very impactful to Siddhartha Gotama, because he didn't live that kind of life and he had never seen that kind of thing before. And then he sees a dead corpse. And the family's grieving and having sorrow and sadness around the dead corpse. And once again, he turns to his royal attendant and asks what's going on. And in the story is the same, that these people are going to be struggling now. And Siddhartha Gautama looks at all of this and he thinks about the kingdom as being full of misery and despair. And then he sees this fourth observation. This fourth observation is someone who's given up worldly life in order to be able to seek an understanding of this sickness, aging, and death and try to figure out why it's occurring. You don't have to leave your life in order to be able to get to enlightenment, but some people choose to enter into a life of homelessness where they leave their life and they end up trying to seek this better understanding of life. And there were people that were doing that during the lifetime of the Buddha. So Siddhartha Gautama asked his royal attendant, like, what's this person doing over there? Because they were kind of meditating and kind of off on their own. And he's like, oh, that person, they're trying to figure out all this other stuff. They're trying to figure out, why does sickness, aging, and death continue to happen over and over? And why do we struggle during those periods of time? And Siddhartha Gautama decides that this is what he would like to do with his life, that he wasn't interested in being a king or a ruler or a monarch because he wasn't interested in ruling over misery and despair. He was interested in trying to figure out a way to help these people out of the misery and despair. So he decides he's going to leave the royal palace and no longer actually ascend to the throne as being a king. And he decides he's going to try to figure out this sickness, aging, and death and why people experience this. This would be the true way to actually help these people. So he goes back to the palace, and by this time it's the evening, and he was married and he had a young infant son, and they're sleeping, and he kind of looks in on them and decides he's going to leave in the middle of the night. He didn't understand his mind as well as he did by the time he got to enlightenment, but he understood it enough that he felt like if he woke up his wife and he woke up his son and said goodbye, that it would be too difficult for him and he wouldn't be able to leave and go on this journey to be able to figure out how to help people with sickness, aging, and death. So he actually leaves in the middle of the night. And now he takes with him his favorite horse and he takes with him his royal attendant. And now when he leaves from the palace, he ultimately gets to a point in his journey where he lets go of his horse. And he tells his royal attendant, like, hey, you've been really good to me. You know, here you go. Here's some provisions. I don't need you anymore. You can do whatever you need to do. Head back to the palace or whatever it is you'd like to do. And he ends up cutting off his hair. At this time, he has this long, beautiful, flowing hair. This is how people knew you were a member of the royal family. That today we put pictures of the king and the queen all over the kingdom, and we know who the king and queen are. We put it on the money, and that's how we know who the king and the queen are. But during the lifetime of Siddhartha Gautama 2,500 years ago, they didn't have this technology. So the way that people knew you were a member of the royal family is you would grow this long, beautiful, flowing hair. And if you went out into the kingdom with that long, beautiful, flowing hair, they knew you were a member of the royal family. Because those of us who are working labor jobs in the fields and businesses and stuff like that, we didn't have the time to grow that long, beautiful, flowing hair because we were working and we were busy doing all these other things. Our hair would get all tangled up and knotted. So it's only the royal family that had people like servants that could shampoo their hair, detangle their hair, brush their hair, and stuff like this. And they actually had the time to sit back and allow that to occur. So if you went out into the kingdom with this long, beautiful, flowing hair, they knew that you were a member of the royal family. So him cutting off his hair was like, I'm never going back, because nobody would ever think that he was actually the king, because he had grown this hair for 29 years. And by cutting it off, the people would never think that he was actually a member of the royal family or that he was actually the king. So from this point forward, he decides that he's going to now take up training to be able to figure out how to get to enlightenment and how to understand this sickness, aging, and death. So he takes up training with a teacher, and this teacher trains him to hang himself upside down from trees, to lay on beds of nails, to pierce his body with metal implements, to starve himself. The thought was that the way to get to enlightenment is you needed to cause pain to the physical body. And if you caused pain to the physical body and your mind could overcome that pain, that you would then get to enlightenment. And these people were claiming that they had figured out how to get to enlightenment. So Siddhartha Gautama takes up training with this first teacher. And that's what he does. He hangs himself upside down from trees. He lays on beds of nails. He pierces his body with metal implements. He starves himself. And he gets to the point after 1 year of training where this teacher comes to him and says, hey, you've mastered my teachings. You can now share the teachings that I shared with you. You're a master. You've learned everything I have to share with you. And Siddhartha Gautama realized that his mind wasn't any more peaceful and joyful than it was when he was in the palace. So he decides to leave from this teacher and go study with another teacher. This other teacher was actually teaching him a lot of the same stuff, hanging himself upside down from trees, laying on beds of nails, piercing his body with metal implements, starving himself. And the same thing happens that after 1 year, that this teacher comes to him and says, you've mastered my teachings. You can now share my teachings. But Siddhartha Gautama noted that his mind wasn't any more peaceful than it was when he was in the palace. So he decides to leave from these teachers. He was frustrated with the whole thing, thinking that he had wasted 2 years of his life. And he goes out into the forest by himself. But the only things that he knows how to do are these same things that these teachers had been teaching him. So he continues to disparage the physical body, thinking that this is what will produce enlightenment. He takes this so far that he was only eating 1 grain of rice per day. That's all he was eating. And he gets to the point where he was doing this for so long that his body is basically skin and bones. His bones are protruding, his ribs are protruding. He's basically on death's doorstep. He's really close to death, and he's on the edge of the forest meditating. And there was this mother and this young child, this young daughter, who comes by, and they see him meditating on the edge of the forest. And they beg and plead with him to eat some rice because they could see that he was close to death. And he reluctantly accepts this rice, and kind of disgusted in despair that he feels like he's given up on the path to enlightenment because he's choosing to eat this rice. But he has a realization in this moment that he discovers what is now referred to as the middle way. He realizes that when he was in the palace, he was living this life of luxury, that he had everything and anything that you could imagine. But when he left the royal palace, he swung all the way to the other side where he was just eating 1 grain of rice per day. And he realizes that none of these two extremes actually lead to enlightenment. Neither of these two extremes lead to the peace and joy that he was looking to experience. So he discovers what's called the middle way, is doing things in moderation. And ultimately, this becomes known as the Eightfold Path. This is the core central teaching of the Buddha that trains your mind to get to this enlightened mental state. So over the course of the next 4 years, he gradually trains his mind, getting to this point where his mind is actually enlightened. And he knows that he's enlightened because his mind is experiencing the peace, the calm, the serenity, the contentedness and joy. He doesn't experience anger and sadness and frustration. None of those feelings are there. His mind is bright and cheerful and radiant and uplifted. There's gladness in the mind, that he's no longer experiencing this despair and misery that is once experienced in the unenlightened state. So he knows that he's figured out how to get to enlightenment, but he also understands that his teachings are radically different than what anyone else was teaching. Everyone else was teaching to disparage the physical body, and his teachings didn't involve that. His teachings were all about training the mind. So he wasn't quite sure whether the world was ready to hear his teachings and understand his teachings. So he decides to hang out at this tree in Northeast India. The tree is actually still there. You can actually go and see it. This tree is where he hangs out for 7 weeks, contemplating whether or not he would actually like to share his teachings and trying to figure out whether the world would actually receive his teachings in a way that would be beneficial, or whether he should just go back to the palace and live life in the royal palace. Well, ultimately, we know what he did, because otherwise we wouldn't be sitting here talking, right, about these teachings. So he ends up deciding to share his teachings, and he decides to go back to the area where he was studying with those first 2 teachers. And when he goes back to that area, he encounters 4 of his previous classmates and 1 of his previous teachers. And when he encounters these people, they start laughing at him and joking him and mocking him. They thought that he had given up on the path to enlightenment, because to them, in order to get to enlightenment, you needed to be disparaging the physical body, right? They were just eating basic food. They were hanging themselves upside down from trees. They were looking like they were close to death, right? But here comes this person so bright and vibrant and cheerful and full of life, and they've got meat on their bones and stuff like this. And these people thought he had given up on the path to enlightenment, so they laugh at him and they joke him and they mock him. But by the time you get to enlightenment, those things don't affect you. Right now, if somebody did that to you, you'd probably be upset by that. But by the time you get to enlightenment, when people are doing those kinds of things, it doesn't affect your mind whatsoever. So the Buddha knows that his mind's enlightened. He's completely peaceful and joyful. So he just comes over to where they're at. He sits down on the ground and he takes his hand and he reaches down and he touches the earth. He performs the one and only miracle that he ever performed during his life. That when he touched the earth, these animals came to where he was at. There were deer and squirrels and rabbits and birds and lizards and all these animals that came to where he was at. And these 5 people, seeing this, they were like, okay, you've got my attention. What do you have to say? Right? And they sat down and they listened to what he had to say. And he delivered his first teaching. His very first teaching is called the Four Noble Truths. In 4 simple statements, he explains what is the problem in your mind, what is the cause of that problem, what is the elimination of it, and what is the path forward and how to completely fix your mind. And the way that the teachings of a Buddha work is that they're independently verifiable, that they're not based in belief. So when he shared those 4 statements, those individuals could independently verify that what he was sharing was true and that he had indeed figured out how to get to enlightenment. So these become the first 5 students. And a Buddha actually doesn't perform many, many miracles because it's actually not advantageous for people to actually know who a Buddha is. A Buddha doesn't need other people to know that they are a Buddha in order to be able to help people get to enlightenment. Because if everybody knew who a Buddha was, like let's just say there was like a certain turn of the ear or a certain mole that was in a certain location and everybody knew like, oh, that's a Buddha, right? Well, then when people are around this person, everyone would be on their best behavior around this person. One of the powers of a Buddha is that they're able to observe the quality of their student's mind. And then when they see certain qualities of their mind, they're able to offer them teachings that are going to help them overcome those challenges to then be able to get to enlightenment. So if everybody was on their best behavior around the Buddha, he wouldn't be able to observe their natural mind. So a Buddha doesn't perform countless miracles in order to convince people who they are. They don't need to do that because their teachings aren't based in belief. Their teachings are independently verifiable. So a Buddha will typically only perform 1 miracle in order to help an initial group of people to know that they're an actual Buddha. And these people are kind of instrumental in helping them bring their teachings into the world. But after that, they don't perform any more miracles. They just share their teachings to be able to help people to get to this enlightened mental state through independently verifying their teachings, to be able to see the truth in their teachings. So from that point forward, those first 5 people become his initial students, but then his students just grew and grew and grew and grew. He started teaching at the age of 35, and he ultimately dies by the age of 80. He dies in 483 BCE. And in that period of time of 45 years, there's countless people that are getting to enlightenment, because you can see as you're getting to enlightenment, the teachings of the Buddha aren't about, like I mentioned, belief and then hoping something good happens when you die. It's about learning and growing and developing in this life to get to this peace and joyful mental state. And as you're training your mind to do that, you can see the truth for yourself that that's occurring. Because you know in situations where you were once angry and frustrated and agitated, and you can see that your mind's no longer doing that in those situations as you're training your mind. So you know you're making your way closer and closer to enlightenment because your mind's becoming more peaceful and joyful. Your relationships are improving. You're going to see that life becomes so effortless for you, becomes so easy and straightforward. It's no longer a difficult human existence for you. So over the course of this 45 years, countless people get to enlightenment. And the Buddha taught in a tradition that we would refer to as an oral tradition, where he just spoke orally, because the language that he spoke, it didn't actually have a characters to be able to actually write it down, because the technology to write things down didn't exist in that region of the world 2,500 years ago. Now, you might not see writing something down as technology, but 2,500 years ago, that was technology, and it didn't exist in that region of the world. So everything he taught was oral. But shortly after his death, they actually wrote down his teachings. And we refer to this today as the Pali Canon, right? By the time you get to enlightenment, you will never forget the teachings that it took for you to be able to experience enlightenment. Your mind has essentially been upgraded, where your mind now has this new wisdom, and you'll never forget that wisdom that it took for you to be able to get to that enlightened mental state. So shortly after his death, the technology of how to write things down and preserve these things in written form had been developed. And now 2,500 years ago, shortly after his death, individuals started writing down his teachings. About 500 of those countless enlightened beings came together and they started documenting his teachings. And those 500 people agreed that, yes, this is what actually led to our enlightenment, and this is what will lead to the enlightenment of other people as well. So a Buddha is an individual who gets to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. They then dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings with countless people. And countless people will get to enlightenment during that person's lifetime. Then they will preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people will get to enlightenment after their death. And this is what makes a Buddha a Buddha. And this is very rare in the world. The last Buddha that the world is currently aware of existed over 2,500 years ago. As part of this journey to enlightenment, the Buddha ultimately figures out why people experience so many difficulties and struggles with sickness, aging, and death. What he discovered is that the mind craves permanence, that when you're sick, the mind is frustrated and agitated and annoyed because you're craving for this body to be permanently healthy. When you live in an impermanent world, it's not possible for this body to be permanently healthy. Because we were born, we are all going to experience sickness, aging, and death. It's unavoidable because of impermanence. But if you're craving permanence, thinking that this body should be healthy 100% of the time, not realizing that it's sometimes going to be sick, when you're sick, you'll experience frustration and agitation because you're craving this body to be permanently healthy. And not only that, but if you have certain activities that you particularly are fond of and you go outside and you do these activities, when you can't go outside and do those things anymore and you're craving for those things to happen, you will struggle and have difficulties during those periods of time. Because what the mind does is that when it's craving permanence and it gets what it wants, it experiences pleasant feelings like happiness or excitement or elation or thrill, exhilaration, euphoria. But when the mind's not getting what it wants, it gets painful feelings like anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, and others. So if you're in this life craving for permanent health, when you experience sickness, your mind's not getting what it wants, which is permanent health. So now you will struggle during that period of time, whether it's your sickness or the sickness of people who are close to you. You might be craving for mom and dad to be permanently healthy, or your children to be permanently healthy, or your life partner to be permanently healthy. And when you see that they are sick, your mind will struggle with that because the mind's craving permanence, when in reality you live in an impermanent world. The same thing can happen with aging, that if you crave permanent youthfulness, now when your body doesn't move as easily, when you have aches and pains, when you start getting wrinkles and you start having gray hair, you start losing your hair, you start getting a little bit of fat or maybe a lot of fat here and there, right? You might start having struggles and difficulties with this. Your mind might be frustrated and agitated. Again, that's the mind craving permanent youthfulness. You're not going to experience that. This body is going to change, right? And then, of course, with death, it's the same thing. The mind's craving permanent life, when in reality, none of us are going to experience permanent life. We are all impermanent. Because we were born, we will experience sickness, aging, and death. It's unavoidable that we will experience those things. But if your mind is craving permanence in any one of these situations, it will be very painful for you when you experience these things. But you can actually train your mind to the point where it's not painful any longer. And not only not painful when you're experiencing these things, but when the people around you are experiencing it. You can understand that all that's happening is impermanence. That's all that's happening. Just like when we came here, it was whatever weather it was, but now it's raining. That's just impermanence. That's all that is. That's just change. And it's not going to be raining permanently. Eventually, it's going to stop raining, right? So the world is full of this impermanence, but the mind craves permanence. And this is what the Buddha discovered of what's causing the mind to experience all these discontent feelings. And you can train your mind to let go, where you're not craving permanence. If you can think back to the boyfriend or girlfriend that you got together with, when you guys first got together, you were really happy and excited. But when you guys broke up, you might have been angry or frustrated or lonely or bored or missing that person. All that's happened is change. This relationship was always impermanent from the very beginning. If you get happy when it's sunny outside and then you get sad when it rains, all that's happened there is change. That's all that's happened. But the mind craves permanence. Or if you get really happy when your bank account balance is up here, when it goes down here, you might get sad or frustrated or annoyed. All that's happened is change, and everything around you is constantly changing, but the mind craves permanence. So the Buddha ultimately figured out this and trained his mind through a very consistent, methodical training to be able to get to the point where his mind didn't experience any more discontent feelings. It was completely peaceful and joyful. He does ultimately end up coming back to the area where he was with his family at the kingdom, with his family. His wife ends up ordaining with him. His son ends up ordaining with him. His mother, his stepmother, ends up ordaining with him. Oftentimes people think the Buddha left his family and he never went back. This isn't actually true. He left for 6 years to train his mind, but then when he came back, he had something very wonderful to share with people, which is how to get past all these discontent feelings. Because if you can get past your anger, sadness, frustration, the misery, the despair, the stress, anxiety, that would be the very best thing that would ever happen for you, is that your mind is permanently in that peaceful and joyful mental state. So the Buddha does end up coming back to that region of the world where he was originally living as a child growing up, and his family members join into learning with him, and they ultimately end up getting to enlightenment. By the time he dies, his wife is enlightened, his son is enlightened, his stepmother, his mother is enlightened. All these people are getting to enlightenment, just countless people. So this is the life story of the Buddha and what he experienced, just kind of a summary version for you. And the motivating factors were this sickness, aging, and death. He was interested in helping people get out of this difficulties and struggles. So I'm going to stop here and see if you guys have any questions about his life story or his journey to enlightenment or what he experienced. Remember, you guys can use the microphones here. For those of you guys online, you can put this into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Curtis has a question. If anyone else has a question, feel free to get a microphone.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned that the Buddha was in the royal palace up until age 29. How did he not see sickness, aging, and death in the palace? Did they just take anyone away from him so he never saw it or experienced any of that?
He saw it, but he didn't understand the grief and the misery that people were having because of it, right? So he saw that people were experiencing these things occasionally from time to time, but he never understood the aspect of life that people wouldn't be able to get the basic necessities to sustain their life. He was sheltered from that.
He wouldn't see the discontentedness that result from all these sickness, aging, and death.
Yeah, because, if you were living in the palace with the king and the queen, and there's this prince who's destined to become king, oftentimes people are on their best behavior around those people, right? They're not showing their anger and frustration and their irritation. They're in a completely different mindset and kind of putting on a front, right? By the time you get to enlightenment, you won't experience those things at all. But if you were living amongst a royal family, you might choose as a member of the staff to be on your best behavior when you're around these people. So Siddhartha Gotama never saw those kinds of things growing up because he was very sheltered by his father and not seeing those kinds of things.
And you mentioned this is the only known Buddha that's been documented. Do you believe there were Buddhas before this one?
So this is one of the few conflicts that you will see in the original teachings of the Buddha. You know, this Pali Canon that we have, it's 45 volumes of books that are this thick. And we know that not everything the Buddha taught is in this Pali Canon. And we also know that everything that's in the Pali Canon isn't what the Buddha actually taught, because it would be impossible for a document to remain the same for all those years. So, in the Pali Canon, we see the Buddha, talking about that he was the discoverer, the declarer, the originator of the path to enlightenment, undeclared before him, undiscovered before him. In other words, he's the one who discovered the path to enlightenment. But we also see documentation in the Pali Canon where he's talking about previous Buddhas before him. So this is one of the few conflicts that you actually see. Now, it's interesting to talk about, and I get this question a lot of whether there were Buddhas before him. But in reality, it doesn't actually truly matter, because if your mind is actually unenlightened, where you're experiencing anger and sadness and frustration, what's important is that you learn the teachings that it takes to be able to overcome that. And these teachings of Siddhartha Gotama, the Buddha, they absolutely lead to this enlightened mental state. I know this with 100% certainty, and that's why I'm dedicated to be able to share these teachings with others. Whether there were Buddhas before him or not, it's interesting to talk about, but we don't have any documentation that there were, other than what we see in the Pali Canon. But it's in conflict with this other part of the Pali Canon. So if there were Buddhas before this Buddha, okay, great, that's wonderful. If there weren't, okay, that's fine. Your mind's still angry, you're still frustrated, you need to be able to train your mind to get to enlightenment. So while a lot of people will spend time talking about those kinds of things, and it's interesting to talk about, we'll actually never really truly know, because we weren't actually there. All we have is these remnants in the Pali Canon that share that there's some places where the Buddha says there were Buddhas, and there's other places where he's saying that he was the only Buddha. So what's true or false, we don't know 100%, but we know that these teachings lead to enlightenment. That's for sure. And that's what would be helpful for each individual person to be able to learn and grow and develop on the path.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You have a question, ma'am?
The Pali Canon, was it, did it begin as oral documentation and then was interpreted into written form and translated many times? Can you just talk about that process of documentation?
Sure. So during the lifetime of the Buddha, it was all oral. Everything he taught was oral. And that's where he used chanting, like we were talking about at the beginning, in order to help people commit it to their memory. And by the time you get to enlightenment, you will never forget what it took for you to get to enlightenment. It's kind of like upgrading the operating system of your computer, that once you upgrade this operating system, you'll fully understand how to use that operating system, and you'll just continue to know that wisdom and know that knowledge. The computer will never forget, right? So the mind in the enlightened mental state is the same way, that what it took for you to get to that mental state, you'll never forget that wisdom. So there were countless enlightened beings during his lifetime, but they were never able to write anything down. It wasn't until shortly after his death, about 3 to 6 months afterwards, that they decided to convene what's called the First Buddhist Council. And this is where 500 enlightened beings came together. They actually met in this cave in northern India, northeast India, and they all started talking about what they were going to do now that the Buddha had died, and how were they going to preserve these teachings. And they decided that they were going to now write them down, because the technology existed. Because during the lifetime of the Buddha, the technology to write things down existed. It was actually in China, but it hadn't made its way to that region of the world yet. They didn't even have a language to actually write things down. So they had to invent a script to be able to write things down now that this technology had made its way to that region of the world. So they wrote down what we now refer to as the Pali Canon. And we've thought for a long time that the Buddha actually taught in Pali, but we found remnants of documents prior to the Pali Canon that it appears that the Buddha spoke a language that wasn't Pali. Because the Pali Canon that we refer to as the Pali Canon, we know that it originates about 1200 to 1300 years ago. And we know that not everything that's in the Pali Canon is what the Buddha taught. And we also know that not everything the Buddha taught is in there, because we see places where he's teaching and explaining how something like loving kindness meditation will lead to the elimination of anger and hatred and ill will and all these other things. But there's nowhere in the Pali Canon where it says what he actually did for loving kindness meditation. This is where you need to be able to learn from a teacher of how to do loving kindness meditation. And if that teacher themselves has eliminated anger and sadness and frustration and agitation, all these other discontent feelings, and you know whatever they did worked for them, so it'll work for you too. But there's certain things like this that we can see that the Buddha is pointing to in the Pali Canon that need to be learned and understood in order to be able to get to enlightenment, but it's just not there. But there's just him pointing to it. So this Pali Canon that we refer to as the largest, most complete collection of the teachings of the Buddha, it dates back to about 12 or 1300 years ago, but it appears that there were things before that that were having captured the teachings of the Buddha that ultimately culminated in what we refer to as the Pali Canon. Because, 2,500 years ago, they didn't have a photocopy machine. They didn't have hard drives to store data on with backups and all these kinds of things. So 2,500 years ago, they had to dry out palm leaves, these really long, narrow palm leaves, and they would dry those out, and then they would make the ink, right, from berries and different things, and then they would write out the teachings. And they had to do that about every 50 to 100 years because these things would deteriorate. They are impermanent. So they had to copy them from one document to the next in this process. And over time, surely things got lost. Surely things were misunderstood, perhaps. But the way that the Buddha teaches you is you can cut through all of this because his teachings aren't based in belief. With belief, you don't know what's true or false. You're just believing it because somebody convinced you to believe it, or you convinced yourself to believe it. What he teaches you to do is to learn, examine, and investigate his teachings so that you can understand them intellectually. Then he teaches you to reflect on those teachings, to independently verify through your own direct experience whether it's true or false. And then you practice his teachings, integrating them into your day-to-day life, uprooting this pollution out of your mind. And as you do so, you'll see the condition of your mind and your life gradually improving. And that's how you'll know that what you're learning and practicing is the truth, because you didn't believe it. You cultivated wisdom. And now through learning, reflecting, and practicing, now you can see the results, that it's actually improving the condition of your mind and your life. So even though we know that some of the things in the Pali Canon aren't accurate, somebody who's gotten to enlightenment, they would be able to peer through that and they would be able to see exactly what is true and what isn't true. But even that person who's enlightened and might be sharing the teachings of the Buddha, because today we have books and videos and podcasts and things like this, you're not interested in believing that stuff either because you don't know where that stuff came from. You would like to still learn, reflect, and practice to be able to see the truth for yourself. So essentially, a teacher is like a tour guide pointing out for you the things that you need to learn and understand. And it's you on this journey to be able to independently verify those teachings that that teacher is sharing so that you can come to the truth, cultivate wisdom, and now you can train your mind and experience the improvement through your own mind. And that's where you'll be able to know that you're learning the true teachings. Very few people in the world actually study with the original words of the Buddha because they've been pretty much inaccessible to the average person, because these 45 volumes of books, they're very costly to print out. It would cost you about 3 months of your salary if you were here in Thailand to be able to print out the entire Pali Canon. So the average Thai person, the average temple, actually doesn't have access to his original teachings. So what we've done in this book series is we've extracted it, where now we have 13 books, and then we give it away for free. That if you download it from the website, you can get it for free because we have modern technology to be able to do that. You can take it and go print it yourself. And if you printed out all these books, it would be about $150, which isn't very costly, right? That's reasonable for somebody to be able to afford. Or you can order the books on Amazon if you have access to Amazon, and still it's fairly reasonably priced there. Or you can get it here by just reimbursing us for the printing costs, because we've gone out and printed, and then you just reimburse us for that, and then we use that money to be able to purchase new books for other people. So now you're actually able to access these teachings and be able to see the truth for yourself, that they actually do indeed lead to this enlightened mental state, where an individual needs to decide that they're done with the anger, they're done with the frustration, they're they're tired of the broken relationships, and they're aspiring for something better in their life. And they're willing to do that work to improve that. So the teachings of the Buddha isn't about going out into the world and convincing other people to do something. It's also not about rules and commandments that everybody needs to follow. There's not one person at the top telling everybody else what they should or shouldn't be doing. It's you. You're in the center of the teachings of the Buddha, where he's helping you to learn and grow and develop. We might actually think about this as like a self-help program, right? And it's been around for 2,500 years. And the Pali Canon is a guide to be able to help you, but not everything that you're going to need in order to get to enlightenment is actually in the Pali Canon. That's why you're going to need teachers and guides to be able to help you. But you never believe in that. You always learn and grow and develop, taking on the responsibility for your own growth. And now you can cultivate wisdom and experience improvement in your day-to-day life. We have a question coming in. So this individual's name is Clover. They say, "Thank you, Teacher David. My father requires surgical and other treatments for his cancer. People around us are hinting that for the best result, we should give under the table red bags to the doctors. But me and my family don't support this culture. So we might decide not to follow these rules. Could you please help us to understand if this is a wise and wholesome decision to make? Thank you very much." If I was you, I would talk to the doctors and say, hey, my father's sick here. What do we need to do in order for him to get healthy? What is needed in order for him to become healthy? Because getting healthy is going to be through wise decision making. That's great that you understand that. And it's the doctors that are going to be able to guide you in that. So if you have access to certain medical care, you would like to ask the doctors and the nurses and the people like this, what is it going to take? And then you're going to need to be able to contrast that information with what you know to be true, and then make wise decisions. Whether there's a payment, in order to be able to get access to the resources that you need in order for your father to get healthy, that's like a whole separate question. So if during this conversation they say, well, in order for them to get healthy, you're going to need to pay the hospital this amount of money, and you're going to need to pay me this amount of money. Well, okay, well, why do I need to pay that money? What is it that you're going to be doing for my father? What types of treatments are you going to be giving him? You would like to understand all those details before you make a decision of whether or not to pay this or not. So be sure you understand the problem that your father's having with his physical body. Make sure you understand the solution, and then implement whatever decisions you think are wise in terms of how to get access to that care, in terms of the money or whatever it is that you need to pay in order to get access to that care. And then Raphael's asking, if the goal is enlightenment, how important is it to go over the Pali Canon? Other than daily practice, is it enough to go through solely modern resources? In order to get to enlightenment, you're going to need to learn and understand and cultivate the wisdom using the true teachings of the Buddha. You're going to need to know the Pali Canon, but not every single translation of the Pali Canon is the same. So when we say the Pali Canon, it sounds like there's just one version of that. There's actually multiple versions. There's probably about 4 to 6 different translators that have translated this over time. And what you're looking for is reliable translations, because you'll see some places that people are translating the Pali Canon and they're actually documenting the Buddha as having said things like, "You stupid fool. How, why would you think that way?" He's talking this way. And I can assure you that an enlightened being doesn't refer to people as a stupid fool, right? That would be degrading and diminishing of other people. But if you read this translation from this unenlightened translator who's translating the words of a Buddha in that way, and you think that's the words of the Buddha, you will go around speaking that way too. And it's going to produce unwholesome results for you. And you won't actually get to enlightenment by going around talking to people in degrading and diminishing ways. So it's not just a matter of reading the Pali Canon. It's about finding a teacher who you have confidence in, that you feel is either enlightened or very close to it, and they have the resources to be able to guide you to the same mental state. It's you that's doing the work, but you're going to need the resources that are reliable to be able to learn and grow and develop on the path. And you're going to need to know the true teachings, because modern resources, what people are saying now are typically off. They're misunderstanding multiple things. There's many things on the internet that I see daily in terms of like Facebook posts and books and even YouTube videos, even by ordained practitioners. Sometimes people think all ordained practitioners know the teachings of the Buddha. Well, that's permanence, right? We understand the universal truth of impermanence. Some ordained practitioners use drugs and alcohol and abuse children and have sex, right? That's unwise. That's not what the Buddha taught. And I would say that those people aren't actually monks, that they might be wearing a robe and shaving their head, but they're not actually practicing what the Buddha taught. So we can't even really refer to those people as ordained or monks, even though they might be living at a temple and appearing to be ordained practitioners. But then you've got people who are deeply practicing the teachings and interested in seeing people actually get to this enlightened mental state. And they're dedicating their life to be able to share the teachings, to be able to help people experience that. So you need to be able to find an individual that you feel confident in, that is going to be able to help you, but then you don't actually believe what that person's sharing with you. You learn, investigate, and examine so that you intellectually understand what's being shared, understanding that you're going to hear things that are different than what you currently think about the world. Then you reflect on those teachings to independently verify them, and then you practice them. And you should be able to see the condition of your mind in your life gradually improving. So you will need to have an understanding of the Pali Canon, but you would like to make sure you have reliable translations of that, and that you have the guidance from a teacher that's going to help you to be able to understand what it is that you're not understanding. Because while the Buddha's teachings are very clear, concise, and precise, they don't need to be interpreted. When you read some of his teachings, you're going to have difficulties with it because your mind thinks in this completely other way that you've been growing up thinking, where your mind is conditioned to think in a certain way. And now when you learn from the Buddha a different way of life, you're going to need to have understanding and guidance from somebody. So for example, you might have grown up thinking that if someone's disrespectful and angry and hostile and bitter to you, you should be hostile and bitter and disrespectful right back to them. That might be how you've been taught. But that's not the way to live life. That's not what's going to get you to enlightenment. So as you learn from the Buddha about how to be loving and kind and compassionate and warm and gentle, this might conflict with what you currently think about the world. And that's why you're still experiencing anger and sadness and frustration. Because the wisdom of the Buddha might be here, and the wisdom of an enlightened being might be here. These individuals are equal, but in terms of their wisdom, it's at a different level. So you're going to hear and understand things or not understand things as you're making your way to enlightenment, and you're going to think, whoa, I don't agree with those teachings of the Buddha. Well, that's of course you don't agree with them because your mind's lacking wisdom and you don't understand how this individual thinks in that particular way. So when you're approaching the teachings of the Buddha, it's not about whether you agree with them or you disagree with them. It's understanding that your mind's lacking certain wisdom to be able to function with this peace and joy. And of course you think differently than this person who has complete peace and joy. And rather than just agreeing or disagreeing with his teachings and just staying where you're at in life, instead, whatever this person's teachings that led to his peace and joy that is different than what you currently think, ask questions about that and try to understand why that person thinks that way and why is it that they share those teachings. Because as you come across certain things that you don't understand in the Pali Canon, you're going to need a live teacher that lives today that you can ask questions to be able to understand why it is that the Buddha was teaching this particular teaching. And if this person's enlightened or close to it, they would be able to very easily explain to you how to move from this amount of wisdom that you currently have in life to coming up to this higher degree of wisdom where your mind can be purified and experience more and more of the peace and joy. So yes, you're going to need to know the Pali Canon, but you need to make sure you have reliable translations and you have a teacher that you have confidence in that can guide you in understanding those translations. Okay, let me see if we have any questions anywhere else. Okay, so this person on YouTube is saying, how do you verify a claim of a miracle, right? So for a miracle that's happened, that miracle is occurring for those individuals that exist in that particular time and space. It's not for other people to be able to understand necessarily, because there's just belief there. So when you hear about miracles that are being performed, you won't know whether or not it's true or if it's false, but it doesn't really matter, because the teachings of the Buddha aren't based in miracles. They're not based in belief. So it's important that you don't believe any of these things, but instead you just understand intellectually, you reflect on it to verify it, and you practice it. The fact that the Buddha performed a miracle during his lifetime, again, it doesn't really matter, because what's important is that you learn and practice his teachings. Proving to others that an individual is a Buddha is not something that a Buddha does. They don't go around the world trying to convince people that they're an actual Buddha. So you don't need to know with 100% certainty whether this particular miracle that the Buddha performed actually happened or not. All you need to do is focus on his teachings. If you learn and reflect and practice his teachings, you'll see the truth that it indeed leads to the peace and joy of the enlightened mental state. And you'll know that this person lived, and you'll know that he was a Buddha, because here you are 2,500 years later, independently verifying his teachings, and they're actually working to improve the condition of your mind. So that miracle that he performed was for those 5 people, just to help them to understand that he was a Buddha. But then from that point forward, nobody else needs to necessarily verify that miracle. It's just verifying his teachings that are going to actually help you cultivate the wisdom that you need to be able to see the truth that his teachings work, and this individual actually lived, and you can see that his teachings are working to improve your mind. And this meets the criteria of a Buddha. Is here we are 2,500 years later, and you're still able to experience enlightenment based on his teachings. That's one of the criteria of what makes a Buddha a Buddha. Okay, let me just check Facebook and see if we have any questions there. All right, I don't see any questions in Facebook, and I don't see any. Oh, Steve, you have a question? Yeah.
Thank you, David. So it's interesting about aging and death. We're living in a time where there's enormous amounts of expenditure and marketing and research on these areas. So we have a lot more choice, which we're either going to confront for ourselves or for our loved ones about this. I mean, real choices like, well, on the aging side, there's a whole thing about anti-aging. I mean, it's a massive industry, and some of it appears good to me, like to make you feel healthier, but with not necessarily being attached to living as long as I can. Mm-hmm. But on the whole death thing, I've seen it. These wards of people where they're just lying there, wired up to machines and drips, and mm-hmm. And so we're going to have a lot more. I mean, realistically, we're all going to have a lot more choices on this area. Like, for your loved one, well, he's not doing too well, but we could put him in this room and hook him up to a machine and drips, and he could probably survive for another 6 months, so we can pull the plug now. What do we decide? I don't know whether there's a specific question there, because it can't be on each individual cases or work themselves out, but I think it's real that we're going to confront more choices in this area than probably the time of the Buddha. Like, do we pull the plug for our mum or our dad or ourselves? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So we're already experiencing more options than that existed during the lifetime of the Buddha. He lived until the age of 80, which is an enormous amount of time for that time frame, right? The normal lifespan wasn't that long during his lifetime, so he lived an enormous amount of time. He had students that were younger than him that were dying before him, right? Or nowadays, kind of like the average life is probably around that time frame, where we have new technology and things to help extend our life, but how much of that you choose to implement, it's a case by case decision. But still, the results of what the Buddha figured out of how to overcome the difficulties and struggles during sickness, aging, and death, that still holds true. So at some point, this being is going to die. These people that are out there trying to experience permanent life or discover the fountain of youth and all these kinds of things, the human beings will never live forever. We're not going to live for 10,000 years or 20,000 years. Human beings have a set lifespan of about 80 to 100 years is kind of what we experience generally around that time frame. And that's what we experience. And sure, we have medical technology so that more of us live for longer periods of time. But generally throughout human history, that has been the lifespan of about 80 to 100 years. But now our lifespan has increased because we have more medical technology so that more of us will actually live for longer. So during the lifetime of the Buddha, while he died at the age of 80, there were other people that were living that long too. The reason why the average lifespan is so low from that period of time, which is like 30s or 40s, is because there was people that were dying that were quite young. So it brings down the average lifespan pretty low. But there were plenty of people who were living until they were 60, 70, 80 years old. He wasn't the only one that was living to that age. So yeah, we have more options, but the struggles that people experience through sickness, aging, and death due to the craving of permanence, that still is needed no matter how many options that we experience. Mm-hmm. Marta, you have a question? Yeah.
My questions, two questions. First one is short. So as I understand, Buddha discovered his teachings in the 6 years period, right? Already. And then he just was teaching. So Eightfold Path, the 10 feathers, 5 precepts, everything was kind of like discovered in 6 years.
Yes, that's right. It was really that 4 years after he studied with those first two teachers, he left for them because their teachings didn't lead to enlightenment. But that was also part of his journey too, because he realized that training the body wasn't part of enlightenment. And this is where you can benefit from his life story, because sometimes you go to some places where they're teaching you meditation, and if you experience pain in your hip or your knee, they say, oh, just breathe through it, right? This is unwise. The Buddha already taught us that physical pain in the body isn't what leads to enlightenment. So what I teach people is to adjust their body, right? That pain is there for a reason, to tell you like, hey, there's something wrong here, make changes, make a different decision. And that's why you have these different positions. So even though his discovery of his own teachings was during that 4 years, his total journey was 6 years. But even that first 2 years did contribute something, that he understood that it's not about training the body, it's about training the mind. And he needed 2 years of doing that to see that that wasn't true, and that wasn't the true way. So that then those later 4 years, he could really truly figure it out. And that's what he ultimately did over those 6 year period.
Then the second question, I'm a parent. So for me, imagining that the father leaves for 6 years, a child, and then he comes back and then he's welcomed. It's great to know that in Pali Canon, we also learned that the family followed him. So somehow they got inspired by the teachings. Is there anything more how he met with his family on the return, and what did he do? Because I believe, the son didn't even recognize him, right? And how then he was able to not have anger and discontent.
Yeah, there's one thing that I can share, is that there was a point in time where the Buddha was like teaching his students, and his wife, who was his wife, came with his young son and said, there's your father, go get your inheritance from him. Right? Because he was the prince destined to become a king. And his wife was like, go get your inheritance. So his son came over to where he's at, and he said, the thing that I can give you is this wisdom of how to get to enlightenment. That's what I can give you. And that's where his son ended up, becoming one of his students. I think he started when he was quite young. I don't know the exact age, but I think it was around 6 or 7 years old that he ended up studying with his father. Well, no, it would have been a little bit later, because he was an infant when he left. So it would have been maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. But nonetheless, that's the way the Buddha saw it, is that what I can truly give you and what's really going to be meaningful is not this gold or this heir to the throne or anything like that. The thing that I can give you is this wisdom. That's what's really going to help you. And ultimately, these people all started learning and growing, and they could have been disgruntled, but think about it. The Buddha left his wife and his child in a royal palace. If your husband left you in a royal palace, that'd be a pretty good life, right? So it's not like he is like a deadbeat dad or anything like that, because that's what some people's negative mind, they try to judge him and they try to look down on him and think of him in that way. But that's just their own mind being judgmental of somebody else. Hey, hey, this individual was interested in helping countless people, and he chose to leave for 6 years. And that's very challenging, to leave and walk away from your family because your mind's holding on and craving permanence. But he did that struggle. He chose that struggle to be able to train his mind. And then once he did, he had something really wonderful to offer his family, but not just his family, but countless people in the world have benefited from his teachings. And that was through his selfless decision to be able to go off on his own and figure out how to get to this enlightened mental state. So some people's perspective looks at it and they're like, oh, that's selfish to leave your wife and child. No, that's very selfless, that you're realizing that even though you could stay here and hold on to your wife and child, to let go is actually much harder and more difficult. And now once he had done so, he figured out this better way of life, and he had something very wonderful to offer other people. Mm-hmm. Yep, you're welcome. Curtis, I think you have another question too, huh?
Hello. Yep. I had some questions about sickness, aging, and death.
Mm-hmm.
So normally when I get sick, like a common cold or flu, I would take medicine right away just to help the body recover. But I know it's perhaps maybe I'm feeling discontent with the symptoms of the sickness. So I'm trying to figure out if maybe I should wait to take the medicine in order to train the mind to be more comfortable being sick. Or is it more wise to take the medicine because you're killing the virus and that's producing wholesome gamma for this being?
Yeah, that's one approach that you can take. You can take the approach of, hey, I realize that my mind is discontent when this body is sick. And one of the ways to overcome a craving, desire, attachment is put your mind in the situation that it doesn't want to be in. So that is one approach, and you can surely do that. But just be sure if you're going to do that, that it's something that is not such a significant illness, right? And that's going to change the trajectory of your life if you didn't take that medicine and things like that. But that is one approach that you can take, and that will surely help you to get more comfortable in accepting of this illness, and that this body is impermanent, and that you're not going to be permanently healthy. Mm-hmm.
In terms of death, I mean, we all accept that we will die. That's eventual, and I think we can intellectually understand that, but at least myself, I can speak for myself, I don't know if when that time comes, if I will be mentally accepting of that fact. So how do we prepare ourselves mentally for that moment? Can we proactively try and put ourselves in that mindset to be ready for that moment, whether it's tomorrow or in 30 years from now?
Yes. So the first thing that I would encourage everybody to do is to practice the Eightfold Path. That's really important. In fact, I'm going to flip forward on this slide because this is the last thing I'll share, and then I'll continue to answer any questions you guys have, is that you need to learn the Eightfold Path. This is the core central teaching of the Buddha. This is what's going to guide you to be able to fully understand how to get to enlightenment. And one of the things I usually share at the end of this talk is that no one ever said life would be easy, but it's also not supposed to be tough. Learning and practicing Gotama Buddha's teachings is not easy, but learning and practicing the teachings of the Buddha will ensure that life is not tough, right? Because life is very difficult in the unenlightened state. So sometimes people go to a building, they show up there, they believe a bunch of things, they worship a bunch of things. That's really easy, right? But then the rest of their life is very difficult, very hard, because they don't have the wisdom to live a better way of life. Coming to a place like this is a lot more challenging because you're having to confront the things that you currently think about the world, and your mind is challenged to be able to come up to that wisdom that the Buddha is sharing with you. But having done so, then afterwards, life is so much easier. So you can either front load this where you're learning a bunch of things and then life is so much easier at the end, and as you continue through your life, or you can do all these little, once a year, 1 hour at this particular building, and then the rest of your life is so difficult and troubled, right? So the Eightfold Path is something that you need to learn, and you need to memorize that inside and out, backwards and forwards. And as you do, and you get that kind of dialed into your life, when you're looking to eliminate your fear of death and the painful feelings that people tend to experience around death. There's a teaching that the Buddha has. It's called contemplation of death or reflection of death, where you sit and you envision that you've actually died and you're coming to terms with your own death. And it takes about 10 or 15 minutes to do this. And you'll probably do it, 3, 4, 5 times over the course of your journey to enlightenment, where you're essentially confronting death. Because death is waiting for every single one of us in the corner, and it's going to come and visit us at some point. And death can either sneak up on you and catch you by surprise, cut you off at the knees, and it feels like the carpet's been pulled out from under your legs, and now the next thing you know, you're upset and frustrated by this. Or if you know that death is coming to visit you, you can be like, you know what? I'm going to come visit you. Right? I'm not going to be scared of you. I'm going to come get familiar with you. I'm going to come get acquainted with you. I'm going to come become familiar with death. And that's what reflection on death or contemplation of death is where you sit quietly with your eyes closed and you envision that you've actually died. You kind of play it out in your mind. You're not aspiring to die. You're just confronting this death and coming to terms with it. You maybe envision that you've been in a terrible car accident, or you've had a very slow, prolonged death, or whatever it is. You envision that in your mind. And then maybe there's like people that inform your family, like a doctor, a nurse, or a police officer, something like this, informing them that you've actually died. And now you play that out. Maybe there's a funeral, maybe there's a cremation or a burial, maybe there's all these different things. And it takes you about 10 or 15 minutes to kind of play all this out in your mind. And you might actually grieve and you might be sorrowful during this period of time. And that's your mind confronting this death and actually coming to terms with it in your mind's letting go of its attachment. And now if you've grieved during that initial situation, then you're going to need to do it again. You're like to wait about 2 weeks to a month, closer to a month, to do it again. And then you do it again and again and again until you get to the point where you can do this contemplation of death and you're completely comfortable with it. And you're like, yep, this being's going to die. No big deal. Of course, I'm going to make wise decisions to try to live this life as much as I can until its fullest. But when it gets time to die, you've already confronted that. And now you're not experiencing these painful feelings as a part of you reaching this death. Whereas if you never confront it and you just try to push it away and just ignore it as if it's not even going to happen, when you get close to death, it'll be very painful for you because you've never confronted it. So the Buddha teaches you to confront it early on like this so that now you can get comfortable with it. So when it's actually occurring, it's no big deal. By the time you get to enlightenment, you won't have any fear at all, even the fear of your own death. And this is the way that you do it, is through the contemplation of death or reflection of death, that technique. But you would be wise to first develop the Eightfold Path really well before you actually start doing that, because the Eightfold Path is what's going to help you to regain your composure, because this contemplation of death, your mind can be a little bit loopy because of coming to terms with your own death, and your mind can be shaken up by it. So you'd like the Eightfold Path to be well underway so you can regain your stability within a matter of hours or days, rather than, kind of what you could potentially experience as you come to terms with your own death. Mm-hmm. Any other more questions?
One more question.
Mm-hmm.
I have a family member that appears to be struggling with the concept of aging,
Mm-hmm.
and they're doing some cosmetic changes to maybe preserve the permanence of youth,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe has something to do with just maintaining this image of self.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice to how I could maybe counsel this? I mean, I don't want to tell them this, but
Mm-hmm.
if the subject comes up and they're willing to listen, how would I approach helping this being understand this concept of aging? And
Yeah. So what you're kind of cluing in on there, which you've heard me teach before, is you're never interested in giving unsolicited guidance, right? Because that would be your own craving. That would be your own ego trying to tell other people what they should or shouldn't do in their life. Instead, like you said, if they're open to this guidance and open to your input, you would like to teach them the same things that the Buddha teaches and that I've taught you, which is understanding personal existence view and what that is, that pollution of mind, and then understanding the solution for the universal truth of non-self. If they're open to it, they would need to be willing to consider that. But then at the end of the day, there's two ways to eliminate a craving, desire, attachment. There's cutting it off and letting it go, which you hear a lot about in these teachings, but then there's also fulfilling it and actually doing it. So if this person has a craving for permanent youthfulness and they're using different cosmetic things in order to try to get that, they will experience that for a little bit, but then eventually they can't counteract aging. It's going to happen, right? And now they're going to see like, whoa, I tried that Botox, but I still have these wrinkles, or I tried that skincare treatment and this is still occurring, right? And they're going to be able to eventually let that go potentially as they get closer and closer to the aging process. But if they're open to learning about personal existence view, that pollution of mind and the solution of universal truth of non-self, then you could share that with them. But you would like to really walk slowly and make sure that they're open to understanding that. And then if you're not able to explain it fully, which you may not be able to, that's where you can look to like the videos that I've done or the podcasts that I've done, the books that I've written about this topic, so that then they can learn it from somebody who understands it, rather than you trying to, walk this fine line of husband, brother, son, whatever relationship it is, trying to walk that fine line because they don't see you as a teacher. They just see you as that role. So you are not interested in trying to do that with them, but maybe you just give them just enough information that it wets their lips a little bit. And now they're interested in seeing some resources that'll truly explain it to them in a way that they can understand. Mm-hmm. You have a question, ma'am?
Okay. Yeah. Hi. Sorry. I'm very new to this, so I don't want to be disrespectful, but and I don't know a lot about the teachings. But my thought is like, let's just assume that almost everybody in the world will get to this enlightenment, and then they will let go of everything. They will think like death is a part of life, so it's okay. They want. And then it's for me like they stop care about pain and death and stuff like that. Let's assume there will be no wars and stuff like that, but still there would be no doctors. There would be no, how to say it? People won't be so arrogant and so, they won't push so much to become a doctor, to become some, because they will just let go because it's a part of life. And then I'm not sure if it's good for, the whole world when everybody will be in the state of mind like it's really, just easy and don't care, like a little bit. I don't think it's don't care, it doesn't pain them, so they let go, right? So isn't that it's hard for me to understand how it's gonna work, if we all go this path, right?
Okay, I will help you because it's clear that you're not understanding. So getting to enlightenment doesn't mean you don't care. This is the misunderstanding and the lack of wisdom that the mind has, is that people think that it's their care that is producing the painful feelings. That you might think that in a relationship, when you break up and you're no longer in that relationship, the painful feelings, you might think it's coming from your care. And when we talk about letting go, you might think that you're letting go of your care. But that's not true. That's the lack of wisdom that the mind has. It's not your care that's causing the painful feelings. It's the craving for permanence and wanting things to be permanent. So the unenlightened mind can see very clearly the chasing, the longing, the yearning. I'll use your example of, I want to be a doctor. Let me chase and chase and chase and chase and chase. Let me put a lot of pressure on myself. Let me work really hard. And then when I become a doctor, I can show off to everybody how great I am, and I can make all this money, and I can have this amazing life. So let me put a lot of pressure on myself to do that. Usually we can see that very clearly in the unenlightened state. And then you can usually see this other side very clearly too, where maybe you're lazy and dull and lethargic and unmotivated and complacent and undedicated with a lack of initiative. You can usually see those two extremes very well, but what you can't see very well is the middle way. That's what the Buddha is teaching you, is to learn how to pursue your goals and objectives and interests through wise decision making, where you're not chasing and forming your inner feelings based on whether you get that thing or not. But you're not also over here where you're dull and lethargic and complacent and could care less about what's going on in the world. None of those two things are enlightenment. But that's what your mind's currently thinking, that if I'm not doing this, if I'm not chasing, then I'm going to be all the way over here. Well, if that's what your mind's doing, you're not enlightened, right? And the mind's not understanding what enlightenment is. The mind that is enlightened can be having ambition and motivation and enthusiasm. And you can work towards goals, objectives, or interests through wise decision making. But you're not forming your feelings on whether or not you're accomplishing that thing or not. If you have a goal that when you get to this goal, you're happy and excited, but when you don't get to it, you're angry or frustrated or sad, that's actually not a goal. That's a craving, desire, attachment masquerading as a goal. So in order to come to the middle, you need to be able to train your mind to be able to see the middle, but the mind doesn't see it very clearly. So if everyone got to enlightenment, what you just described wouldn't occur. There would still be doctors. There would still be people who are interested in maintaining the health of their body. It's just that they're not going to form their inner feelings based on it, right? So somebody can experience sickness and not be upset about that, but still choose to take medicine because they would like to make sure that this body is healthy, right? You can still do that, right? Or you can choose to be a doctor or a nurse or a street sweeper or a taxi driver, but you're not forming your feelings based on that. You just understand this is what I truly enjoy doing, and this is what I would like to contribute to the world. So yeah, because you haven't learned the teachings, your perception of what enlightenment is and what that would produce for the world is not fully understood. But I can assure you that an enlightened being isn't just going to be like, well, I'm sick, so I'm just going to let this body die. Right? That's not very wise, right? You're going to still go to the hospital. You're going to still get help, but you're not going to be upset. You're not going to be angry. You're not going to be scared and fearful. Oh my goodness, what is the doctor going to tell me? Is that test going to come back positive? You're not going to be shaken up by it. You're just going to make wise decisions. You're like, this body's sick. It's ill. Let me go make some decisions that are going to try to improve this. Oh, you need to do that test? Sure, let's do that test. And now when the test goes away and you're waiting for 3 weeks for it to come back, you're not experiencing stress or anxiety. It's just a matter of, okay, let's see what the test is. Oh, the test is positive. This body has cancer. Okay, well, what do you suggest next? Instead of, oh my God, I have cancer. Oh, I'm so upset, right? Like that's what an unenlightened being is going to experience. And that's unfortunate that they experience that. I'm not making fun of that or joking about that. I'm actually very motivated to see people not experience that, to understand that, yes, this body might have cancer. And now let's try to make some wise decisions, if you would like, to try to extend this life as long as possible, but still understanding that this body is going to cease to exist someday. It's not permanent. So getting to enlightenment would mean the world would completely be peaceful. There would be no wars, like you said, right? People wouldn't be fighting in the streets and stuff like this. But if you do your work during this life to get to enlightenment, you'll never see that world. You're never going to see a world where everybody is enlightened, because if you can get to enlightenment in this life, you're not going to see the time when everybody gets to enlightenment, because it's going to take multiple generations for that to occur. If you would like to look at any kind of truth to be able to see the peace and joy that is experienced by more and more people practicing this path, just look at Thailand. Thailand is not a perfect society, but there's a lot of peacefulness. There's a lot of joy here. That's why people call Thailand the land of smiles, right? When people come here, they see the Thai people are very peaceful and very joyful. So that's maybe perhaps some evidence to be able to help you see that learning and practicing these teachings, if a large group of people are doing that, then more and more the world just becomes a more peaceful place. Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Arthur. I'm new. My question is, when Buddha went and discovered for the first time the sickness, aging, and death, he made the goal, right? The goal to find the joyful life, joyful and peace. When he was in a castle, in the palace, he found out what is like a pure pleasure in a way. I mean, the style of living was like a pleasure. Then he found out what is like a extreme pain. You said this is the middle path. Is the joyful? I'm concerned about the word joyful. This is not in the spectrum between pain and pleasure. The joyful is somewhere just in the very middle. It's a sweet spot. Is this correct? What I understand?
Yeah. So what you need to understand is what's called conditioned feelings versus unconditioned mental states. So what an unenlightened being will experience is they will experience conditioned feelings that based on some condition, they will then experience a feeling, either pleasant, painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, like uncomfortableness. And what a conditioned feeling is like, okay, it's sunny outside, so now you're happy. That's based on a condition. That if the condition is met, meaning that it's sunny, you will now experience a feeling. But now when it moves to rain, the mind experiences a painful feeling because it's craving this permanent sun, and that's conditional. Because now the sun is not permanent. So if you base your feeling of happiness on the sun, that means your happiness isn't permanent because the sun is not permanent. So as soon as it changes to rain, you'll be frustrated or annoyed or angry or some other discontent feeling. So these are called conditional feelings. Essentially, the unenlightened mind is going up and down and up and down and up and down. It's only a matter of time before you get irritated and frustrated about something, right, in the unenlightened state. It's because they're experiencing conditional feelings. This joy that I'm talking about, we might also describe it as unconditioned happiness, that there doesn't need to be any condition met in order for this happiness or this joy to exist in the mind. Where in the unenlightened state, it's kind of like if my mom and dad do this, if my brothers and sisters do this, if my boss does this, if I have this much money in my bank account, if the weather is this, if I have this type of car, this type of house, then I'll be happy. Right? And for all those things to be true, you're actually shrinking your ability to be happy because all those conditions can't be met all the time, right? So your ability to be happy becomes less and less. This is why some people are old and grumpy. Not everybody's old and grumpy, but some people are. A lot of people are because they have all these expectations of all these conditions that need to be met in order for them to be happy, right? This is called conditional happiness. What the Buddha is guiding you to is unconditioned joy or unconditioned happiness, where there doesn't need to be any condition met in order for your mind to be happy. This is what you train your mind to be able to do, that it doesn't form its inner feelings based on some condition. So now this enlightened being, when they wake up in the morning, they're already happy. There doesn't need to be any condition met. All day long, they're happy. It's unconditioned happiness. It's not the same type of happiness that you're used to where your mind goes up and down based on a condition. It's that the mind is bright and cheerful and glad and joyful, and there doesn't need to be any condition met for that. So you wake up all day long, and when you go to sleep, your mind's still joyful and happy. But in the unenlightened state, you can't experience that. When you wake up in the morning, you might be grumpy or irritable because you didn't get a very good sleep. Or you look out at the weather and it's not what you want. Or you look at your phone and you see a text message or a voicemail or an email that your mind is like, I don't want that to occur. The mind's craving this permanence. So now the mind's frustrated or agitated or annoyed. So the joy, that's in the middle, where it's unconditioned, because the mind in the unenlightened state can't experience these unconditioned mental states permanently, because it's only a matter of time before one of these conditions are either met or not met, and now the mind's unstable and unsteady. So what you're doing on the path to enlightenment is you're purifying the mind of the causes and conditions that are producing these discontent feelings. And when you purify the mind of the causes and conditions that are producing these feelings, now your mind is unconditioned, that it's been purified, that it no longer will experience anger and sadness and frustration and all those other feelings, because the causes and conditions that produce those have been uprooted and eliminated out of the mind. And now you have this unconditioned mind. So one of the ways you can think about this is that the mind is already enlightened. And when you get rid of the causes and conditions that are producing the discontent feelings, you will then be able to experience those qualities. And that's the unconditioned mental states of joy and peace and calm, serenity. Those will be permanent in your mind by the time you get to enlightenment. All right. I don't see any other questions anywhere. So what I'm going to do here is just in class by thanking all of you guys for joining. Thank you for your interest to learn and grow and develop on the path. If you'd like to learn more, you're more than welcome to. There's plenty of opportunities for you to do that. Just hearing the life story of the Buddha doesn't really give you the super tangible things that you need in order to understand what enlightenment is or how to transform your mind. That's what I've been teaching throughout this program so far, right? We're in chapter 19 here. We're actually going to be restarting this program in January, and you can attend whether you're here in Chiang Mai or you're traveling, because we live stream our classes all over. So you could attend by Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you could watch the recordings if you can't attend live. You can actually start at any time in this program. There's people who sometimes start at the end like this, and then they restart it when we restart it. There's also various courses and retreats and things like this that are available to you. Everything's available to you at no cost, whether it's books, audiobooks, videos, podcasts, personal guidance, classes, courses, retreats. The only thing that you need to put in is your own dedication and effort to learn and grow and develop. You need to decide that you're done with the broken relationships. You're tired of being angry and frustrated, that you'd like to experience this better way of life. And if you're ready to do that, there's help for you here to be able to do that. I suggest people start with this first book by either downloading it from our website, to take it and go print it, to get printed versions here by just reimbursing us for the printing cost, or you can order it on Amazon, because this is the book that's going to guide you in establishing a foundation. And then the various classes and programs and courses and retreats that I share, they're available to you either live here or online, or you can watch the recordings and you can slowly learn and understand how to get to this enlightened mental state. So if you'd like help, there's someone here that's motivated to be able to help you and guide you in that journey. So some other events that we have coming up in the next few days is this evening at 6:30 over in the main hall. We have a meditation, and that's synced up with the Sunday night walking market. So if you're coming for the walking market, or if you'd like to just come for meditation, we're going to be doing meditation at 6:30 in the main hall. I just do meditation with students, and then I just open up to whatever questions you guys have. So there'll be people that'll come there. And then at 9 p.m. here in the classroom, I also do meditation, and then I teach this same topic that I teach at 9 a.m. I teach it at 9 p.m. too, because right now the people in Europe are sleeping, so they might be interested in attending a live class. So we make it available twice a day so that people can learn and grow and attend live if they'd like to. And then on Wednesday, I'm going to be doing meditation here with students and opening up to any questions that you guys have. And you can see the courses and retreats and all these things that we have on our bulletin board over there, or you can see on our website, we have an events calendar. You can see all the different options that we have. And you're always welcome to come talk to me, and I'll help you figure out how to get plugged into the various learning opportunities. So whatever you guys choose to do today, have a very wonderful and lovely rest of your day. Perhaps we'll see you guys in a future class, and take care and be well. Thank you for coming. And by the way, since it's raining so much, don't feel like you have to leave. If you guys would like to stick around or stay out there in the vestibule area, you're more than welcome to hang out in the temple. If you're on a motorbike or you're walking, don't feel like you have to leave in a hurry. Okay? So have a wonderful day. Okay? Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.